Hello and welcome to Top Story. He's 83, facing international pressure and quiet maneuvers to succeed him within his own party. Yet, Robert Mugabe is adamant there's no vacancy for the presidency of Zimbabwe. And to prove the point, he intends to stand for a sixth term in next year's elections. In a boost on Thursday, his ZANU-PF party endorsed his candidacy at a congress in the capital, Harare. But is Mugabe fully in control, and could those elections in March 2008 weaken his grip on power? To discuss that, I'm joined now by Nicholas Norbrook, the managing editor of the Africa Report, bi-monthly magazine based here in Paris. Mr. Norbrook, thanks very much for being on Top Story. Could you tell us about these challenges within ZANU-PF to Robert Mugabe?
Well, essentially there are two camps. In one corner you have Emmerson Mnangagwa. He's the head, or the former head of the intelligence operation there, the Central Intelligence Organization. He was the mastermind of the massacres in Matabeleland in the 1980s and commands a great deal of support in the intelligence services. In the other corner, if you will, there is a couple, the Majurus. Solomon Majuru, widely regarded as a kingmaker within the ruling ZANU-PF, and his semi-estranged wife, Joyce Majuru, who is currently vice president. They all come from the sort of liberation era. They all fought together in the fight against colonialism, which ended quite recently for Zimbabweans. So there's a very sort of close bond and yet this rupture. Mugabe's been very clever in balancing these two factions against one another. Really, it's been a very delicate interplay of the forces in Zimbabwe today.
Would they do things differently, either of these factions, if they were in power, in terms of cracking down on human rights activists on the opposition, or would they continue in Mugabe's line, do you think?
I think that they wouldn't really change much. Former General Majuru has a vast empire, if you will, of business interests in the country. So he really is interested in getting his wife, Joyce Majuru, in power, just to protect those interests. Mnangagwa, as I was saying, he organized massacres in the 80s, so I can't imagine that his human rights record would be vastly different.
Let's talk a bit about these elections then. Is Mugabe's victory all but certain?
I think so. He has a wrestler's grip on the ZANU-PF party. He has something called the Youth League, the Green Bombers, who are young kids, often unemployed, often in the rural areas, which are given a little bit of military training and viciously enforce ZANU-PF doctrine within the rural areas. He doesn't have that much support in the urban areas. When you have huge food price inflation and you live in the city and you have no way to grow your own food, you tend to lose your faith in the ruling powers that be rather quickly. But he does command a lot of respect in the rural areas still. He has made a constitutional amendment which allows him to choose his successor. It's going to be Emmerson Mnangagwa, and this should be confirmed over the weekend. If he does this, then he kind of buys the support of the Mnangagwa faction, essentially securing his victory in March. I don't think he'll have any problem.
Well, you mentioned the rural-urban divide. Will the opposition movement for democratic change really make a big push this time then in the urban areas, and can they make a breakthrough?
It is their stronghold, the urban areas. That's where they often make the most gain in elections, and the operation against slum towns and shanty towns around Harare and in the urban areas in Zimbabwe was really directed against them. It's hard to say. They are so divided at the moment, the MDC, the Movement for Democratic Change, at the moment split between the Mutambara faction and the Morgan Tsvangirai faction. So Mugabe's, he's done it again. He's divided the opposition, he's divided his own party, he's divided international opinion. So, the divide and rule has worked very well for the man.
What about international views on this situation at the moment? Thabo Mbeki, the South African leader who's the mediator, says the talks between the government and the opposition are going well. The opposition says nothing of the sort. There are still abuses, police beatings and so forth. It's very hard for the West to understand why Mugabe might still be popular.
In the latest edition of the Africa Report, one of the eminent writers on Mugabe did a great biography. A guy called Stephen Chan talks about this secular mythology that Mugabe has built up around himself, a kind of myth of nationalism where he's opposed himself to Blair, for example, Mugabe versus Blair, right versus white, national integrity versus the forces of globalization. So he kind of wrapped himself in this myth of nationalism. He's still very popular. President Mobutu of Congo, all those years ago, used to picture himself against the clouds with heavenly music behind him. He doesn't have the church's backing, so he's created this secular mythology, the liberation credentials, and so on. And so the more the West bashes him, as it were, the more he can take on a martyr figure, a la Chavez. He's being victimized, so he's in the right, and the evil oppressors are bashing him. And it's not the cleverest way to deal with the situation. I think.
The other side of the coin to Western bashing of Mugabe is Western investment in Zimbabwe. A bit of a paradox.
It's I think. The old saying, buy when there's blood on the streets. There's a surprisingly long queue of investors. They have to be risk-hungry investors, but nevertheless they're there. The influential investment bank Merrill Lynch released a report in the summer saying there was a whole load of Zimbabwean assets which were very tempting indeed. In mining, for example, a lot of platinum mines, in property, in banks, and in telecoms. There are a queue of investors waiting to get their hands on these assets.
Including Barclays Bank from nemesis Britain.
Indeed, there's obviously the anti-imperialist rhetoric from Mugabe goes down very well in some quarters, and he spends a lot of time bashing Britain. During the Peter Hain mediation, he said that Britain was being run by a gay cabinet, which won him applause in Zimbabwe and horror, obviously, around the world. And Barclays Bank has a subsidiary in the country. And to have a subsidiary in Zimbabwe, you need to have at least 40% of your capital in government-backed assets. As a result, in 2006, they invested almost $300 million. This, according to our sister publication, Africa Confidential, who's been asking some very difficult questions to Barclays, who haven't revealed, which ministers have accounts with Barclays Bank.
Okay, we'll have to stop there. Unfortunately, thank you very much, Nicholas Norbrook from Africa Report here in Paris, talking to me about the situation in Zimbabwe. Do join us for another edition of Top Story on Monday morning.